Welcome to the HuntFishTravel Podcast, the show that works really, really hard to interview folks that are going to provide you with information and inspiration for your next hunting or fishing trip. I am your hostess, Carrie Z. Before we jump into the show, I'd like to remind you that Spy Point is this show's biggest sponsor. They pretty much help me keep the lights on. Be sure to check out the HuntFishTravel Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, whatever pages for Trail Cam Tuesday picks. I've got some really cool ones coming up. Oh my god, I thought I caught a badger, and as it turns out, it is not a badger. It's still pretty cool though. So anyway, I'll be posting that in the next couple of weeks, so be sure to go to Facebook or Instagram or wherever. This episode is also brought to you by Montana Decoy, my secret weapon for bagging both turkeys and deer. I just got a new one that I'm excited to release in 2 weeks for South Dakota. We're going to Chase Merriam's, and I'll be doing an unboxing video up there. So be sure to head on over to the YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe. Also, partners of the show, Costa Sunglasses, Radians Outdoors. Each of them have sent me gear that, yes, I actually use. I live for my Costa sunglasses, let's be clear. And the fact that they'll put prescription lenses in their polarized frames is a lifesaver. You can always check out the HuntFishTravel.com/huntingcabellas, no apostrophes, for a list of all the products that I've purchased to use this year. The list is changing. I have to update it because I accidentally got a job at Cabela's, and more to come on that. I know I have not been updating you guys with the solo casts, and I've got a couple in the works, and it's a pretty funny story. So I've got a solo cast coming next week. It is amusing. I have no idea. I don't know how I get into these messes, but anyway. So I've got a couple of extra t-shirts that I'm going to be giving away in the next month. I've got a ton of swag. You guys, go review the podcast, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, wherever. Just go to HuntFishTravel.com/Spotify, HuntFishTravel.com/Apple. Leave a 5-star review. Send me a screenshot. I literally will send you a t-shirt and probably some other stuff because I have a box of stuff to give away. Be sure to sign up for the newsletter. Every once in a while I actually do send out a newsletter, and I'm going to be sending out some extra stuff at the end of this month and at the end of May. So full disclosure for this episode, I was going through and I was cleaning up. HuntFishTravel Podcast has been around for a really long time, and I have a ton of content, almost too much content. You can't have too much content, people say, right? Yes, you can. You can have too much content. You can have so much content that you forget about the content that you created 10, 11, 12 years ago. Right, so I'm going through old episodes, and I'm like, this isn't really relevant anymore. Yeah, I could probably trim this out. And I come across this episode that I did with Gary Cornam from Easton Archery about arrows and hunting arrow tech. And I'm like, man, I should republish this because this is really relevant stuff. This is stuff that is evergreen, and it's information and educational and stuff that, whether you're new to the sport, whether you've been shooting for years and years and years, it's always a good refresher, and it's really great content, so I've decided to republish it. So, if you've already heard it, I apologize. Listen to it again. It's fine. And if you've never listened to it, well, enjoy. Any bow hunter these days has heard the name Easton Archery, one of the biggest and baddest arrow manufacturers in the industry. With a comprehensive line and exemplary customer service base, I know that from experience, they are definitely at the top of the food chain. But what arrows are right for you? What arrows are right for what species? How does speed factor into your arrows? What does arrow diameter, or arrow weight, or shaft selection even mean? And what in the world is kinetic energy? Well, I'm excited to say that on this week's episode, I have Gary Cornam, Marketing Manager for Easton Archery, on the line with us to answer those very questions and talk about the more technical side of archery and bow hunting. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a really great opportunity, and I love being able to do this and talk about arrows.
Awesome. So before we get into the real heart of the matter, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself? Have you always been interested in archery, and how did you get involved in the archery and hunting industry?
Yeah, I'd love to. When I was very young, I was introduced to hunting probably around age 8 by my dad, and went out and we were pheasant hunting and deer hunting, and really not with archery at that time. And then, but I just remember being a youngster, and the night before the pheasant opener, I couldn't even sleep, and we'd get up at 3:30 in the morning, and I was the night before putting all my dad's equipment together and making sure everything was all laid out, and so early on I just took to it like a fish to water. I just loved it, and went to school, got a degree in marketing, and kind of in the back of my mind, just the dream would be for me to work in the industry and be around it because of that early love that I developed for the outdoors. And then later on, around college time, some of my friends introduced me to hunting with a bow and arrow, and I just that was just the neatest thing because of how up close and how you're just so in touch with the game, being so close to it and all that. And so I really developed a love for it, and then had an opportunity to come on with Easton. And early on, it was right out of college. Early on, I was actually working the technical support line with our dealers with the toll-free number, and I did that for a couple of years before I really started in the marketing. But I really go back to those days of working the technical support line, and it was interesting because I came on at Easton without a ton of archery experience, but those first few years working here of needing to go out and answer the questions for the dealers in the technical realm of sport really gave me a good foundation to which to build on to this day. So I got that foundation of knowing how the bow and arrow system works and why certain arrows work for one type of archery or another. And so that's kind of the background I have in a nutshell. And I've been here. That was the early 90s, so I just completed 20 years here at Easton, and I've most of that time here in marketing.
Wow. Very cool story. So, now that you are with Easton, why don't we start with the new products for 2013? Can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, we have... we'll go back a little bit farther than just this year, but just briefly, Easton's been focusing on small diameter for about 7-8 years. And if you look at our 2013 product line and new product introductions, it really follows that direction that we've been going with developing these smaller diameter products, not just for bow hunters, but also for target archery, and really the hunting products that we have in the small diameter category, which is really where our focus has been over the last, like I said, 7-8 years, has been in that area. And it stems out of what we found in the target world, particularly with the Olympians shooting this very small diameter arrows. All of those attributes that they have that they take advantage of for the long distance shooting really translate well for the bow hunter. So our big product introductions, a lot of people have heard about the new injection arrows, which is kind of a follow-on to our Axis and our full metal jacket arrows that are also small diameter. The injection is our newest and kind of the one that people are talking about, but that's even smaller than an Axis, and that's kind of and it uses the new Deep Six technology and the new Deep Six broadheads that are coming onto the market right now, and people are just barely finding out about those, but it's that smaller diameter category. So, we've got the injection and we've got some speed shafts. We've got the new Detorch and Hex arrows, and those are also reduced diameter. They're not as small as an injection, but they're reduced diameter, but they're also fast. And then we've also got the Carbon Aftermath, which is also a reduced diameter arrow that is really a great arrow. It's affordable for most bow hunters. So we run these technologies across the product line really to make a shaft for every hunter.
Huh. Wow. You mentioned the Deep Six technology. Why don't you give my listeners just a real brief explanation as to what that is?
Yeah, what that is about, it was 2004, we introduced the new Axe arrows, and those we had to do a new insert system in order to get those arrows to be as small as they are and still be able to thread the broadhead side of the shaft. And so we came out with hit inserts for the axis, and that's really as far as we could go with the existing broadheads. So we got together with some of the broadhead companies and said, hey, we would like to kind of take this technology to a new level. Hunters have been having great success with the axis and the full metal jacket, but we would like to go to the next level. We want to get arrows down in that area where they're actually available for the bow hunter in the same diameter that the Olympians are, or close to it, that the Olympians are shooting. And so we had an arrow prototype that we came up with, but we needed broadheads that would fit inside that, so we wouldn't have to use those clunky outserts that bow hunters might remember from about 20 years ago. So everything's still inside the shaft, and so we went and came up with, working with broadhead companies, what we call Deep 6, and it's basically a new component standard that's smaller than some of the 832 broadheads that have been on the market really for about 40 years. So this is this is replacing a 40-year-old technology, and it's smaller in diameter than the 832 system that have, like I said, have been in broadheads and field points and inserts at the front end of the arrow for the last 40 years. This is a new, smaller system, and they had to go out and find higher strength materials. And a lot of people know that there's a lot of steel broadheads on the market now. So when you couple all these things together, we felt like the time was right to bring this out. So what it allows us to do is take an arrow and make it even smaller than the axis. And one thing I should say, we've talked about the smaller diameter, but we really haven't talked about the benefits to the hunter. And in our testing, and I touched on it briefly, what the Olympians have found is that these smaller diameter arrows, they carry their kinetic energy down range better. And as you can guess, with the bow hunters, that's what we want. We want a lot of downrange energy to get a lot of deep penetration. They're also less affected by crosswinds, which is really important to the target archers. It's also important to bow hunters if they're shooting in the crosswinds. If your arrow's pushed out of the zone even an inch or two, sometimes that can make the difference between game recovery or loss or a hard tracking job. So you want the most accuracy you can get. So even a small crosswind blowing when you're in the tree stand can affect where you're aiming and where your shot actually hits, to the point where you might have a long tracking job ahead of you versus a quick recovery. So there's that, and then the actual penetration as the arrow's passing through, reduced friction as it's passing through game. And so one of the things that we're calling out for bow hunters to help them understand is there's this overbore phenomenon that's going on, where the broadhead is cutting a certain diameter hole, and that ferrule is leaving a hole. These smaller diameter arrows, what they do is they track through that cavity, through that hole that the broadhead's creating with far less friction. So it's driving that broadhead with less friction, and you're getting deeper penetration. And the people that we've been using prototypes on these for about 3 years, and they're just reporting just phenomenal field results using the new injection arrows with the Deep 6 broadheads and components.
That's awesome. That's absolutely fascinating to me. It's amazing how much physics go into something as small as an arrow,
Well, yeah, and and I could talk about this all day because I'm immersed in it and I think about it all the time. But there's so many. If you open up our catalog, a lot of times, and you see all these different hunting arrows that we make, it's easy for a hunter to become confused. If they're standing at one of our retailers, and they're standing in the arrow aisle and they see all these things, and they're like, what should I shoot? And the real quick answer is they're all good, and they're all going to perform very good in the field. But one of the ways I look at it, and I try to explain it to people, is if it's incremental increases in performance. For example, you can put snow tires on a car, and the car will run great with regular tires. But then when you get into a condition where you need those snow tires, that's when you're really going to notice a difference. So if you get into a condition where everything's perfect, you may not need those snow tires, and 95% of the time, you're going to drive around and everything will be great. And that's kind of where you're at with arrows. Do you want when you some of these arrows that have higher performance benefits, like an injection, like an axis, like a full metal jacket, what you're going to find is that you're going to get those extra performance benefits when they're needed. For example, if you happen to hit a shoulder just wrong on an animal, and you're shooting a full metal jacket, you might get that extra penetration driving through where it gives yourself that advantage. You hit a rib square or something like that. You're getting a little bit of performance benefit by having the right arrow when the conditions aren't just perfect. Same with crosswinds, things like that with these injection arrows. So what you're looking at is, yes, all those arrows that are in our catalog are great for hunting. But what I tell people is get the most arrow you can afford or want to pay for, because you give yourself every advantage you can, because conditions aren't always perfect, so it's going back to the snow tires. When it is snowing and conditions aren't just perfect, you're glad you've got them. So we have arrows we have we're starting to use the millimeter designation now so that people can understand a little bit better what the difference is. But like we have arrows all the way down to the 5 millimeter category, and so you can pick some up that are 6 or 6.5 millimeters in diameter. But as you go down, you're getting more performance and less friction, less crosswinds, more kinetic energy downrange. So we're working hard to help people understand and be able to compare. But really, that's what it boils down to is buy all the performance that you can, because conditions aren't always perfect, and so every advantage you can give yourself when you do catch that rib or shoulder, or when you do have a crosswind, is going to help you and help increase your success when you go out bow hunting.
Excellent. That is a perfect explanation. So backing up a little bit, why don't you kind of explain to me, my listeners, just what the difference is between, say, a hunting arrow and just a basic arrow?
Yeah, I mean we've got arrows built for really all specialized purposes. We've got arrows that are just meant for 3D. We've got arrows that are meant for kids. We've got arrows all the way up to the ones that they shoot in the Olympics and win the medals with. Mm-hmm. So it depends. Recreational shooting, we've got arrows for that. But then there's different materials too. Easton's long since been developing and experimenting and doing research on what the different materials were. Originally, a lot of people don't know. The company started in 1922 making longbows and wood arrows, and it was started by Doug Easton back then in 1922. So we're 91 years later now. But the kind of the company culture evolved around his desire to make a more accurate arrow. With the wood arrows, and they were shooting tournaments with those wood arrows back in the day, there was a lot of difference in the way the grain of the wood was oriented, and it really affected the way the target arrows shot. So his frustration in trying to get those arrows to match up and group tight really led to the aluminum arrow in the 1940s, which revolutionized tournament archery at that time, and really I think started the bow hunting phenomenon as we know it today. That came about really in the 50s and 60s, and it came about because of improvements in the equipment, and then that sort of started the company culture of Easton. We're really looking for ways to innovate. We came out with carbon in the early 80s, and then we started putting the two materials together with aluminum and carbon. It was aluminum on the inside and carbon on the outside. We call that an AC arrow, and still in use today and still in use by the Olympians. Then about 7 years ago, we reversed it. We took a carbon arrow and put an aluminum jacket over the outside, and that's the full metal jacket arrow. We've also got arrows that are meant just for speed, like our new Hex arrow and our Torch arrow that I mentioned earlier that are just new out for 2013. So, somebody who wants to shoot, just go out in the backyard and shoot targets. We've got everything from our game getters that have been around since the early 1970s up to, some affordable carbon arrows like the Aftermath that they can shoot that are going to work great in the target. And but as far as different materials go and just set up for just an arrow versus, say, a hunting arrow, really, it boils down to, can you put a broadhead on it? You could shoot with, you could hunt with some of our target arrows, but it has to have a way to put a broadhead on it. So we make arrows that are specifically designed for hunting that have the components that will accept broadheads, and that's what really separates the hunting shafts. And then a lot of times what we'll do is we'll add like a full metal jacket. What that does is it increases the kinetic energy available to the bow hunter. But just really it boils down to the components. And if it's a target arrow, all you really have to do is have a target point that'll fit inside. But in most cases, a hunting arrow just has to have a threaded point that will accept a broadhead, and you can still go out and shoot targets with it. But you just have to be able to switch it over to broadheads in order to go hunting.
Okay, let me just ask you, just kind of on a sidebar here. You mentioned the AC and the full metal jacket arrows. One has the aluminum on the inside and the carbon on the outside, and the other one has exactly the opposite. What would be the difference? Like, why would you shoot one over the other? Why would aluminum inside
absolutely.
or outside be more preferable?
Yeah, I'll give you the technical answer, and
awesome.
and it's with the carbon on the outside, what it does is it's a very efficient way to use the carbon. And let me just describe why we do that. The aluminum material is extremely precise. In fact, if you look at some of the areas of precision archery in the target world, which is probably the highest one that I can think of is the indoor, where they're shooting the same distance, usually 18 meters. They use aluminum arrows to this day because that material is so precise in three areas that we focus on the most. One is spine, and spine is another word for stiffness. Spine, and then straightness and weight. And really of those three, a lot of the bow hunters focus most on straightness, which in actuality, straightness is probably the least affects the precision or accuracy of the arrow of those three things. Spine and weight are the most important. And it's really critical that for arrows to be accurate, that you have consistent spine all the way around the shaft. So it should be the same stiffness all the way around. And aluminum is extremely precise in that regard. And same with weight. From shaft to shaft, they're very consistent. So we take the precision of the aluminum and we put it with carbon. Now what carbon does is carbon adds a lot of strength without adding a lot of weight. And so when you combine those two materials, what you really get is an excellent arrow because you're pulling in the attributes of both materials. You're pulling in the strength and the lightweight attributes of carbon, and you're pulling in the precision of the aluminum. Now you'd ask, well, why put one on the inside and one on the outside? Well, there's a reason for that. And generally, we don't have a full metal jacket in the target world, and it's because that carbon, if you're trying to get lightweight, which is generally what a target archer will want, the carbon is more efficient on the outside of the arrow, and so we generally use the carbon on the outside for the target shooters. Although we make some excellent products that use carbon on the outside, they translate very well to the bow hunters at the same time. However, when you put the aluminum on the outside over a carbon arrow, a carbon tube, basically, that it makes for a nice situation where you've got a lot of kinetic energy available. And additionally, it's kind of a side benefit that the bow hunters get is that aluminum. If you ever pulled the arrows, carbon arrows out of targets, sometimes that can be kind of difficult. That aluminum surface on the outside lends itself to pulling easily from practice targets. So that's just kind of a side benefit to these other things that I've listed. So it's very conducive. We call it the full metal jacket because it's a carbon arrow that's been jacketed with aluminum, but it's really conducive and makes an extremely good arrow for the bow hunter.
Very interesting. I guess for whatever reason, I always just thought that, carbon arrows are better. Carbon arrows are better. No, I don't want anything with aluminum in it,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's kind of the mindset these days where, aluminum is old school and I don't want that.
Right. No, it's actually, it just depends. And we still make and sell a lot of our game getter arrows. It looks a little different than it did 40 years ago, but they are still a fine product, extremely accurate, and in most cases they'll do the job for bow hunters. But that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about incremental performance increases as you go to these other materials. I love the combination of the materials when you're putting the aluminum with the carbon. Full metal jacket's what I have. I've been shooting some of the injection arrows that we just come out with this last year, but the full metal jacket arrow is really one of my favorites to go to. Especially for a lot of the majority of the country that's hunting whitetails out of a tree stand, it's really a great way to go. And I tell guys, a lot of guys really want speed, and speed is really important in a lot of applications for certain hunters in certain situations. But if I'm hunting at known distances or in distances that are generally where 30 yards is maybe a long shot, I tell bow hunters that really what they want to do is pull all the kinetic energy they possibly can out of their bow and put it into that arrow. And an arrow with a more mass weight does that. When you shoot a lighter weight arrow, you'll notice that your bow's noisier. What that is that's your bow telling you that you've left a lot of energy in those bow limbs, and that translates. It comes out as noise. And really, the best situation possible is to pull all that kinetic energy possible out of that bow, putting it into the arrow. So when it impacts, it's impacting with a lot more force, a lot more kinetic energy. And a full metal jacket arrow does that extremely well. The other thing that does is it quiets the shot. If you watched video of these whitetails being hunted out of a tree stand, you'll get a lot of times they're moving before that arrow ever gets there. And so quiet bow is extremely important. And so I tell guys that are tree stand hunters hunting whitetail, that arrow with more mass weight is a great way to go. It's not the only choice, but it's really a great way to go because you're impacting with a lot of kinetic energy, and then you're getting as much energy as you can out of the bow limbs and putting it into that arrow.
Excellent. And as far as arrows playing into speed, I guess I would assume that the only time that really comes into play is say if you're antelope hunting and you're taking a 70-yard shot, you needed to get there quicker than the
right. There's
right?
Especially the out west hunters. There's different situations, but that's exactly it. If you're trying to flatten your trajectory out because it really does come back to shot placement, and where you're off, your distance might be misjudged a couple of yards and you're taking a longer shot. A flat arrow is a great solution to that. And a lot of these times too, like you said, like an antelope's a good example because you don't necessarily need a lot of kinetic energy to bring one down. Mm-hmm. But shot placement is the key. So where flat shooting comes into play, we have the products that are very fast that will flatten out that trajectory and get your arrow there in a straighter line. So, they're definitely a place for that. We have a lot of lightweight, fast products, Flatline, Hex, Detorch, that are meant for those guys. That some guys too, they like to hunt with the same arrow that they shoot 3Ds, and 3D shooters love to have that flat trajectory as well. So that's a great way to go for the guy that's looking for speed. And we kind of have arrows in between too. They're a good mix of both kinetic energy and speed. So that's kind of the gamut, like an Axis would fit into that category. But when guys look at that, they get confused because if they read our catalogs and they look through those pages, they see, this arrow sounds good, and then they turn the page and they go, well, this arrow sounds good, and there isn't really one answer to say, you need to use this arrow for this type of hunting and this arrow. In most cases, there's a few exceptions, like when you're going to dangerous game in Africa and that kind of thing. We have arrows that are specifically meant for that, and I would always steer a guy in that direction. But in most cases, any of those will work well. But it goes back to what I was saying, is a lot of the differences are just incremental differences where you're getting performance benefits as you go up to the different arrows, and it gives you an advantage when conditions just maybe aren't quite perfect.
Excellent. My God, my head is already spinning. All right, so since we're talking about this is awesome. We could talk for like 3 hours, and I could put.
Well, I definitely could. I feel like I'm spraying a fire hose of information at you, but
okay.
I love talking about it. I really do, and it's just it's my world. Arrows is my world, and we
Absolutely.
think about it and talk about it here at work every day, and think about it maybe a lot more than most people would. But that way it's the way it ought to be, because that way when somebody goes to buy an Easton arrow, they know that's what we've been thinking about it, and trying to figure out every scenario possible where we can get the person what they need and get them into the right product.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. They know that you guys, well, obviously having been around for, what did you say, 91 years, that your R&D department is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we've been arrows for 91 years, and it's been fun it's fun to look back at the old stuff too. We've got stuff in our archive here that arrows that Doug Easton made back in the 1920s, and the first question you asked me was, what do you have new for this year? And one of that I didn't mention was our new Axis traditional arrow, and when I designed that one, I went back into Doug Easton's. I went over in the archive, and I went back and found some of his original arrows that he made back in the 1920s, and I took some of the colors cresting that right off of his arrows and put them into the design that we used to make that Axis traditional arrow. And it's a beautiful arrow, and in fact, it's so many guys are excited about it. Some guys that don't even shoot a recurve or a longbow are actually using that arrow in their compound. It's built off an Axis platform, which is an excellent hunting shaft, but it's got the great look of the kind of the 1920 throwback look from Doug Easton's original wood arrows. But we have some of his handmade bows here, and we just run deep with archery here at Easton with his company that he started, and we still I've got the factory right behind me here in Utah, still making our products right here in the United States that guys can go out with and hunt with an arrow that was made in the USA, and with guys that love to bow hunt just like they do. So it's made by those guys made by bow hunters for bow hunters here in the USA, and so we're really proud of that too.
That's awesome. That is awesome. All right, let's get back to hide penetration. So, going off of what you said, I'm just kind of picturing in my head, so like a flat line is built more for speed, but someone like me who I only shoot, 35 yards maybe, and I only pull like 42 pounds, so obviously my arrow's going to arc anyway, so I want something heavier so that when it hits that animal, it'll penetrate more than, say, a flat line, because that would just kind of be pointless for someone like me.
Mm-hmm.
But, so the shaft diameter, would it be better to use a smaller one that might penetrate all the way through, or like a larger one that's going to pack more of a punch and leave more of a more gaping hole? Yeah,
for the women, we have that's a really good question, and I think in most cases we've been, again, what I described before with the smaller diameter, I think is even more important with the women and the shorter draw shooters, some of the younger shooters as well. We have like our new ion shaft that I hadn't mentioned yet either, is a reduced diameter. It's not as small as an injection, but it's a reduced diameter. So you get kind of the right mix for women that are out bow hunting. We have that available, and we even brought it out in pink this year. For the women, a lot of the women like those. So it's a great looking arrow too, and so we have that available. But we also make sizes in most of the line. So, for example, if you wanted to shoot a full metal jacket, and I've set a lot of women up with the full metal jacket arrow because it goes back to that kinetic energy. So we have that in like a 500 size. We also have a really good arrow for women is the Axis size 600. And that's a really good spine fit for a lot of women, and it's got a small diameter for the extra penetration and a good amount of kinetic energy too. It's kind of like I said before, a good mix of speed, small diameter, and kinetic energy. So I would recommend the Ion or the Axis size 600 or 500. And with possibility a third one thrown in there, the Full Metal Jacket for all those same reasons I listed before.
That's funny because, like, as you're talking, I'm entering the information. You have that shaft selector on your website at
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I put it right in, and the first thing that came up was the 600 Axis. I shoot the FMJ 400s, and they're fantastic.
Right.
So maybe I'll go out and buy some Axis ones because.
Yeah. Yeah. The Axis 600 is a great way to go, and it doesn't surprise me that popped up.
All right. So let's get back a little bit. Let's circle back to like the kinetic energy and whatnot. So the physics of arrows. Why should a bow hunter really care that much about the physics of archery? I mean, they can go into a shop and the shop owner can say, well, this is the arrow that's for you. But obviously, I think that archery bow hunters are a lot more technical than, well, I shouldn't say that. They're not more technical than gun hunters, but sometimes they are. So why would they really care about, say, kinetic energy or momentum, etc.?
Well, I think the bow hunter, they just by default they do maybe need to be a little more technical than maybe a general hunter, but there's a lot going on with the bow, and and giving yourself every advantage, like I said before, is really the best way to go when picking what you're going to be shooting arrow wise. But kinetic energy is really important, and it's a function too of what type of bow you have, how long that draw length is, too, and those kind of things. So if there's only so much of energy available inside that bow, and what the arrow can do is it can help a hunter. If they get the right arrow, they can get as much energy as they possibly can out of that bow by picking the right arrow. And really, I think that's what you're really trying to do. By doing that, you're getting more speed, you're getting more energy downrange. When that arrow impacts, that's really what's driving that broadhead through there is the kinetic energy. So, some of these arrows that I've listed is really designed to help do that, help facilitate that energy transfer from the bow to the arrow, and then ultimately from the broadhead, driving that broadhead through the target. All
right. And kinetic energy can actually be deduced by a formula, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Just why don't we explain to the listeners just exactly what kinetic energy is? I mean, obviously it's the back end point of energy, but what exactly is kinetic energy?
Well, it's I think I might even have this memorized from my days on the tech line, but it's and I'm going to mess it up, I know, but it's basically a function of your velocity. It's the velocity squared, I think, the mass weight of the arrow, and then it's multiplied by like 450,240. It's divided by, I should say. And then what that's going to do is it's going to yield a number of foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And what that is and that's the velocity is squared. So that's the factor. When you bump up your velocity, that's where you really, get a lot of kinetic energy increases. But that kind of might go against what I said before when I was saying, you want to shoot an arrow with more mass weight to get more energy out of your bow, and that still holds true. But really, the ultimate you want to do is shoot the heaviest arrow you can as fast as you can. And, that kind of your bow comes in and how efficient it is in delivering its kinetic energy to the arrow and leaving as little as possible in the bow with vibration and noise and all that. But it's an important, that energy is important because what it is that's what's driving your broadhead through the bone flesh vitals of the target downrange. And so, it's important that you get as much kinetic energy as you can, because that is the function, that is what's going to push that arrow through. And so it's even more critical for shorter draw archers, like the women and the younger shooters, because they have less kinetic energy available, and that's generally a function of what they call the power stroke of the bow, and that's the length or the distance that the arrow is pushing on that nock or on that arrow until the arrow comes off the string. And that's the longer that distance. So if you have longer arms, you have a longer distance where that is taking place and transferring more energy into that arrow. So when you have a shorter distance, shorter arms translate to a shorter draw, shorter power stroke. It's even more critical that you get as much energy as you can in that arrow, so that you get the penetration needed to cleanly take game when that broadhead impacts. Gotcha.
Because without enough kinetic energy, it would just basically bounce off the animal.
Right. I mean, yeah. If you imagine, another way to look at it too, and this is a good way I used to describe it to people, is, if you took your bow and you dry fired it, you're basically leaving all that energy in the bow, and that's why it can damage your bow when you dry fire it. And it's very noisy. If you've ever heard somebody dry fire a bow, it sounds like right. It's because all that energy stayed in the bow, but virtually all of it. Some of it's transferred in the string, the motion, and that kind of thing. But almost all that energy's that's just left there in the bow, and that's why it's in such a bad situation. Well, as you go through and then you start shooting, say, put a very, very lightweight arrow on there, you still have kind of a noisy bow, but you're going to get a lot of speed, but be real noisy. And then kind of the other end of the spectrum is, if you imagine shooting something like, say, a crowbar out of your bow, something really heavy, a big piece of iron, the string is going to move very slowly, and that that crowbar would maybe fly a few feet and just kind of fall to the ground. But there'd be almost no energy left in the bow. The string would basically come to a stop, at the rest, and then the shot would be, the bow itself would make almost no noise, and you've basically taken all the energy out of that. So it kind of gives you that kind of that contrast of going from one extreme to the other, where all the energy is left in the bow versus milking all of it out of the bow. Now, you wouldn't want to shoot an arrow that heavy, because it just wouldn't have the velocity it would need to penetrate, or the distance you could shoot it. So you're trying to find a spot between that spectrum of shooting something that's maybe a little too light versus getting as much energy you can out of that bow, but still having enough velocity to, get your arrow there quickly and shoot it in a flat enough trajectory that you can have a little bit of flexibility in your estimation of distance, so that you can still make a good shot.
Excellent. Okay, I like kinetic energy. I like that equation. It's kind of what I was first introduced to as far as physics in relation to archery. Mm-hmm. But you go on any forum or like on Twitter or whatever, and you've got like your kinetic energy camp and you've got your momentum camp. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about momentum. Can you explain like what the factors into an arrow's momentum would be, and what momentum really is?
It's that's kind of that kind of gets into the realm of probably maybe more of when our engineers get involved. I mean, mostly there are a few measurements that I can go over. Are pretty, really relevant, and maybe something that we can talk about. I can talk a little bit about momentum too, but one thing that I would like to bring up is, and maybe something that a lot of the bow hunters, a lot of your listeners maybe haven't thought about before, is this thing we're calling kinetic energy density, and This is something that we've kind of been using the last couple of years, just to compare arrows, and particularly for the bow hunter, is if you look at the front of an arrow, if you look at the arrow, most of the time you're looking at it from the side, but if you turn it and look at it front, is if you take your kinetic energy and you're focusing it down into a smaller diameter, that's your kinetic energy density. So if you took 2 arrows, and that's kind of something that you just asked me about a few minutes ago, is should I shoot a bigger arrow or should I shoot a smaller one? That's another way of looking at it. Just take that arrow and turn it and look at it from the end. And what you're doing is, if you keep all things equal, let's say you have 50 foot-pounds of kinetic energy with an arrow that's a bigger diameter and an arrow that's a smaller diameter. Well, it's the same amount of energy, so you'd kind of say, well, maybe I would expect to get a similar amount of penetration. But when you think about it, you're taking the same amount of foot-pounds and you're focusing it down into a really small diameter. And a way to look at that is, think about, say, shoes. If I stepped on your foot with my heel from a cowboy boot, it might be uncomfortable, and I push down a certain amount. Say I push down 50 pounds, to use the same example of 50 pounds, even though it's not kinetic energy, but just say 50 pounds of pressure. With a cowboy boot heel, it might be uncomfortable. But then imagine doing it with a high heel and pushing down again with that same 50 pounds. That could really hurt. And that's kind of the same, and because it's pushing in a smaller focused area. And that's kind of the way I think about kinetic energy density, is you're pushing through that smaller column. And what that translates, and that's why we're seeing those big increases in penetration through game, which is really what you're trying to get. You're trying to get a hole in and a hole going out. You want to get that arrow all the way through. You want to get that broadhead all the way through there. And this is one way to do it, is to focus that energy into a smaller column. And by doing that, you're going to get deeper penetration. And that's I think a better way to look at it, maybe than just momentum.
Okay, excellent. And just kind of, I guess, off the cuff, are there minimum requirements, like, for kinetic energy in relation to species that you're hunting, legally or just ethically?
Yeah, there's been a few years ago, we looked at that, and the quick answer is no, because there's only so much a person can do with what they have available. However, there are guidelines. I think there's that 40 foot-pounds of kinetic energy is kind of your threshold for big game. Mm-hmm. Now, if you could cleanly take, once you hit that threshold, you can probably cleanly take about anything you want to hunt in North America. However, the lower your kinetic energy, the more critical your shot placement's going to be. Mm-hmm. So, if a shorter woman with a short draw length goes out and hunts moose, can she take that moose? She can, but she's going to have to be very careful about where that shot placement is. You don't have a lot of leeway there where you can hit that moose, versus somebody with a real long draw length and shooting a heavier poundage on their bow. It's going to have a little more latitude as where they hit that big heavy game than somebody that has less kinetic energy. And then, then it's just a practical thing too. Like, a guy could say, hey, I'm going to go shoot 85 pounds. But if you can't shoot that 85 pounds accurately, I'm talking about 85 pounds of bow weight now, then you're better off maybe backing that down and shooting something that you can shoot more accurately, but place that shot in that behind the shoulder, in that sweet spot that we all know about. And then once you get that broadhead in there to do its job, then that's the critical thing. If it's a steep quartering away shot, you need more penetration, and you may want to wait for that broadside shot if you have less kinetic energy. So, you hit that 40 foot-pound threshold. And I'm kind of pulling that out of my memory here, but I think that's about where we had. Okay. If you're hunting turkeys or something smaller than that, you don't need quite that much, but it does hit that threshold, and it's kind of that same. It kind of translates about the same to your bow poundage too. That 35 to 40 bow pounds is about where you kind of start in the hunting world. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the more you can shoot accurately, the best, the better off you're going to be. But one thing to remember too is shooting targets and shooting out of, where you're having to, maybe contort a little bit to take a shot out of a tree stand is a different thing. Or if you're cold, perfect conditions are different. I've seen people, on film, they get a deer in front of them, they're a little bit nervous. Suddenly, that 70-pound bow isn't quite as easy to draw, or if you got a lot of clothes on or something like that. So I just think something that you can comfortably draw and something you've practiced with too. You're going to build up the strength in those muscles by practicing. So practice will help that, but certainly shoot as much bow weight as you can comfortably shoot accurately, and that's factoring in conditions not being perfect in the field. I would much rather draw back my bow at 60 pounds and be able to place that shot where I want versus trying to draw 70 pounds and get a little more kinetic energy and then not being able to get the bow back or not being able to shoot it accurately.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree. People can make fun of my little 42 pounds all they want, but I'm telling you what, it's spot on. So
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, honestly, the bow and arrow is a great system for hunting, and it's much more important to get that shot accurately placed than it is to try to maximize the kinetic energy. That's where arrows can come in and help. If you pick the right arrow, you can help build up your kinetic energy without having to increase your bow poundage or do something where you might not shoot as accurately. And that's where I said some of these arrows like the Axis or the Full Metal Jacket or the Injection are give you that little extra advantage because you're able to get a little more energy out of your bow without having to crank up the limbs and try to do that kind of thing. So shooting your 40-pound bow and doing that I think is more important.
Yeah. Well, Gary, you have thrown a ton of information at my listeners but I thank you so very much for coming on. Arrows are obviously such an important part to the archery or bow hunting experience, and it's always helpful to have someone as knowledgeable as you on the show to explain some of the complexities. So why don't you tell my listeners where they can go to find more about Easton? Do you guys have a Facebook page?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, you can obviously check out our website at eastonarchery.com. The other good thing to do, and what I suggest, is get into an Easton dealer. And they're trying to help you, and they can help answer some of these questions. And I'm always happy to, if you ever want to come on and discuss some more topics, whatever, I'll be happy to help out. But I definitely get in there and see your Easton dealer. They're all over the country, and they're there to help out. And if you need product information, you can check out our website and at eastonarchery.com, and we've got all our arrows shown there from target to hunting and the full gamut. And that's the other thing about Easton that it goes back to what I said before with Doug Easton and all that, and his early love of archery. We've always tried to have an arrow for everybody. We make everything from a small 12-14 to a little kid shooting a 10-pound recurve all the way up to the Olympics to somebody that wants to go shoot a 90-pound bow, in Africa at dangerous game. So we have an arrow for every type of archery, for every size and shape of archer out there. So get into the dealers or check out our website, and you can find out all the information you need right there.
Cool. Well, with that, we say thank you again, and I'm sure, because this conversation has spawned like 3 possible episodes in my head, that we will be talking to you again soon.
My pleasure.